Excellence Associate and the Sustainability Excellence Professional. And those are actually now in the GBCI suite. So those are going to be with, if you've heard of the LEED credentials, LEED Grade Associate, LEED AP. These are other credentials that are now managed by the same nonprofit organization. And then we do all the education around those. When it comes to ethics, we are a little bit newer in sustainability as a field than project management is. Very quickly, rapidly changing and growing, but as a society, as ISSP, we have a code of ethics that we stand for as employees, as governing board, as volunteers. We have not taken the step that PMI has to hold every member accountable. Is it something we're considering in the future? Probably we will get there, but at this point we are looking for ways to be as inclusive as possible, globally respectful as possible, which is a big undertaking, because at the end of the day, what we see as obvious when it comes to ethics may or may not resonate the same in Nigeria or Japan or Singapore. So it's just, as Mark shared, a very labor-intensive process to make sure it's something that's inclusive of all facets of sustainability across the globe. Some of the things that we do hold ourselves to at ISSP and the ways that we do pass that on to members are things like being innovative, being objective, looking at data. This is a science-based industry. So making sure everything you're doing is data-based, making sure that you're fair and responsible, making sure you're honest, making sure you're a good person. Basically, at its core is what we look at as ethics. And the ways that we pass that on to our members, really, while they're not signing a code of ethics to join, anytime you're interacting or collaborating or networking, you're held to specific policies in which our ethics policy is very, very highly tied to. So making sure that you're not, spreading lies, you're not intimidating people, that you're being honest, you're being fair, etc. So with that, pass it over to you.
Okay. So hi everyone, I'm Sanjana. I'm the co-founder and executive director of EarthHacks, and we're an environmental hackathon organization. So in a sentence, our goal is to harness hackathons as a form of climate action because they happen everywhere. They're really energy intensive and exciting, and it's just a huge missed opportunity to not harness the power of a bunch of really brilliant, passionate people working on problems together for a weekend in service of climate action. Because that is kind of our big challenge as a species. If we don't figure out how we're going to have a planet to live on, we're not going to have time to figure out any of the other challenges that we face as a society. And we also want to have the time for everyone to realize that all of these things are interconnected. Food scarcity is not separate from climate change. Social discrimination is not separate from climate change. And learning a bit more and providing students, the next generations, the opportunities to engage with that. So we've done over 50 hackathons all over the world, both in person and virtual, and we've worked with over 3,000 students on projects ranging from wildlife conservation to creating diagrams of flows in fast fashions and materiality, which is really interesting. So if you're interested in talking about hackathons, I could talk about it all day, so please come and find me. But really, the core of what we do and why we do this is because young scientists and engineers in particular have a very special role to play when we come to thinking about what are we going to do about climate change. Both because, there is a huge portion of the climate change issue that does rely on technology, that does rely on more efficient solar panels, that does rely on green buildings, and because we have to understand how we fit in the broader framework of these solutions, that we are not actually the only people who have the ideas and the skills, and we need to learn how to interface with policymakers and the people doing other work like community building. But also, we have to engage with kind of the more uncomfortable question of what did we as scientists and engineers do to cause climate change issues? How did we build the infrastructure for polluting industries, for vast injustice? And why didn't we act on it sooner? What was stopping us? So environmental hackathons are a really great way to kind of explore these in an educational setting and really allow students to experience this transformative environmental education that allows you to think more critically about what is your role in this space? What is the role that you specifically can have in tackling this grand challenge that humanity faces? When it comes to ethics and how we engage with ethics, we really think about it in terms of harm. we really think about is what we're doing causing harm to people, or are we working to actively not cause harm to people and the non-living environment, because that also has a or the non-human environment, excuse me, that also has an impact on us. So we think very carefully about what types of challenge statements are we working on at our hackathons, even if they're just educational. What are we kind of encouraging students to think about advancing in these challenge statements? When we do partner with organizations, are they organizations that are taking the climate crisis seriously, or are they downplaying it? If we do work, to host different talks and workshops, what types of transformative education are we putting forth in front of students, and why? So we really think about ethics in terms of like being very explicit about harm and thinking about, even with the best intentions, harm can be caused. But what are you doing to actively try and shift that conversation, actively try and move it so that we can work towards a world where fewer people are harmed, where we have cleaner air, cleaner water, greater access to education, a lot of the sustainable development goals that Michelle was talking about earlier. So with those two things, we also work on issues around environmental justice and technology, which is actually a workshop that I'll be giving later today. So I'll save that spiel for later and I'll pass it over.
Thanks. I'll try to make this contrast this a little bit. And these were organizational discussions. I'll try to make it a bit more personal from a working engineer's point of view. I've always been a tree hugger all my life, and I'm a sailor instead of a power boater. And when my first job in engineering was for a defense contractor. This was still in the Cold War. And I blissfully worked for a defense contractor and did really fun stuff, mostly related to the potential of killing people. And I happily went through this and decided I didn't want to do it. And the reason I didn't want to do it is because of the unpredictability of all these contracts. You work very hard at something, and then somebody gets a dirty taste in their mouth, they shut it down. It gets hidden, and it gets hidden next to the lost ark in the greatest house. So I then went into commercial maritime for a little bit, which I truly enjoyed, but it was my love. And then I got the opportunity to design sailboats for the America's Cup. The America's Cup is this ancient sailboat race in the Formula One of sailing. And I was the chief engineer in that kind of particular challenge. And I really, really enjoyed it. It was like the pinnacle of engineering. Everything that I was working with, the gods of engineering, was a fantastic thing. And then the America's Cup kind of shut down, and I was trying to make a living as a designer of yachts. And I had this very strange realization that yachts are not really contributing to society. They are going to be a little crude, but they're personal penis extensions. In other words, somebody's very rich, and they feel that their boat needs to be bigger than somebody else's boat. And I was doing that for just a little bit and saying, this is not really what I want to do. And I started realizing at that stage there was a disconnect between what I think the world should look like and what the rest of the world is doing. I then changed jobs, and I ended up working for an engineering company that deals with disasters like oil spills and explosions, capsizes of ships, injuries to people and stuff like that. And it was still deeply commercial. It was not any high level type of, I'm doing this on an emotional level. It was deeply commercial. But the interesting thing is that starting that job where we were asked to provide technical, operational, financial analysis of these disasters, that I came to realize that there were ethical issues. And this is the first time that I really got deeply involved in the ethics. And through a parallel coincidence, I was also required to get a professional engineer's license, which had to go to ethics, which I'll explain in the next section. In doing so, I have encountered probably 10 or 15 situations where it really became an ethical discussion. For example, a lawyer might say, I want you to do this and that. So I'm not going to do that because that is, it is just something that can be done on an engineering level in an ethical fashion. The lawyer might say, yeah, you're working for me. And I'm going, yeah, but I'm not going to do that for you. And he says, well, then I'll go to somebody else. So, well, you're going to do that and you're going to do it with somebody else, then I'll have to tell the authorities. And the lawyer said, well, then I have to sue you. But as an engineer, you have an additional piece that you can say, well, I have a code of ethics. I'm not supposed to harm the public. You got to leave me alone. And so as an engineer, when you move up in the ranks, you'll end up in situations where you have to make these ethical decisions. And you do not make those ethical decisions if you're not aware of the ethics. That's the important part. You really have to start thinking in terms of what am I doing? What am I really doing? And what I'm doing, does that really make sense? And I'll stop there because we'll discuss more later on.
back to, you started touching upon this, but can you elaborate on the Venn diagram between environmental responsibility and ethical responsibility, given that we're an Engineers for a Sustainable World conference?
Yeah, no, for sure. So I think, let me turn this on so people can hear me online. So I think that a lot of times in discussions about environmental sustainability and how expansive it is, people bring in separately that there's a social side. And so you've heard this probably in the acronym ESG, which is something of a hot topic in business spaces right now, environmental, social, and governance, right? And so we treat these things as though they are separate. And I think that that is doing everyone a disservice, both by assuming that we're not able to understand these complex concepts of kind of interplay between things, and also because they're really not. We can't have environmental safety without regulation around environmental safety. We can't do that without a social responsibility and governance to enable that. So that's an example. So I think that, you know, if you think about how there's an environmental area in one circle and an ethical area in another circle, the reality is they're kind of these blobs that interface with each other the vast majority of the time. So I think, you know, as environmental professionals or as engineering professionals who live on a planet and therefore care about the environment, because if you breathe air, drink water, or eat food, you're an environmentalist. These things are still framed as separate, but I think that your generation or our generation, I don't know, is kind of coming up to really see the effects of what the separation can do. And it's our responsibility to work to bring those things back together, to not see environmental responsibility and ethical responsibility as separate, especially taking this framing, which is pulled from Earth Hack's environmental justice and technology principles of harm, and being explicit about considering harm and using that as kind of a guiding framework. If you want to minimize environmental harm, that's kind of an ethical responsibility. So touching kind of back to your question, I'd say that I'd really encourage everyone to think about environmental and ethical as two sides of the same coin. Or if you're an electrical engineer, you know, electricity and magnetism are perpendicular to each other. They're part of the same wave. It's the same thing.
Like an analogy. Yeah, and Mark, you talked about having a code of ethics or building a code of ethics for the Project Management Institute. And I'm wondering if A, you could elaborate on sort of what that looks like, and B, talk about whether or not that includes aspects of sustainability.
Sure. So it was a unique process because, as I mentioned, PMI at the time was already a global organization, but also wanted to become, much more deliberately global in terms of, inclusiveness, in terms of bringing in others that are interested in project management, recognizing that the world was increasingly global organizations, global government cooperation. So we needed to create a language and framework that organizations and individuals could deliver major projects and programs against. And and as part of that, we recognized that there was a behavioral aspect to it. So when I think about ethics, just to be clear, I kind of fall and default rather to its derivation, which is really ethos and ethics. It's a way of living, right? So when we started to develop the program and ultimately the ethics code, we look at it as a way of working. So how do we live, how do we work, and how do we want to work together as a profession and as individuals in an organization? We had to be respectful to, and this is one of the complexities, every other profession has a code of ethics, at least the licensed professions do. We just heard engineering has one. You'll find that in law and accountancy and so on. Every organization of substantial size generally has a code of ethics. So we're in conflict, or at least complementary, so we had to manage that as well. But when we got to the global aspect, there was an additional cultural aspect. I think I heard Michelle say a little bit about that. I'm sure she's experiencing it. So if you think about a way of living, way of working, and responsibility, it's different country to country. Obviously, examples you can point to, if something's doing something wrong in the US or Western Europe, it's generally okay to tell your boss, your direct superior, that we shouldn't be doing this for X, Y, or Z reason. You're in China, it's not so much the case. You would never embarrass your superior in China and certain other Asian cultures by publicly saying, we should be doing something different. So we had to consider all those things. So the end result was the code has two components against each of the principles in it. One is aspirational, and the other is mandatory. So there's certain behavior, way of working, way of living that is mandatory. And it's pretty straightforward. I think if you were going to go out to PMI.org and read the ethics section on the webpage, it's pretty straightforward. It's the things you would expect. And the aspirational laid the groundwork for where we might be able to go forward as we got more mature globally as an organization and as a profession, and these could convert into more mandatory requirements. And then right now there's a section for comments to help people interpret. We'll realize when we built the code that to implement the code was even more difficult. So we actually had an ethics volunteer committee, just like ESW, just like all your organizations probably have, and they came together and created basically an implementation, which you would expect from the project management institute, by the way, but a way to implement the code within your organization and within the profession. It was very helpful, and it's an ongoing process. It's never over, but it does really start. And I give you just one anecdote of standing. I was in Europe. I was in Amsterdam, and we're talking about the ethics code, and one of our volunteers from the Nordic countries stood up and said, I have a concern about this code. It seems like you're telling me how to think. And we just nodded our heads and said, yeah, actually we are telling, saying if you want to be a professional in project management with a certification from PMI and or be a member, we're telling you that you must think and act in an ethical way to maintain that status. If you don't want to do that, to act that way, then you can't be a member. And it was just kind of a bright light went off, which is around what you're really asking people to do in ethics codes, which is we're asking you to align your behavior against a certain set of standards. And for me, since we're ESW, ethics should be really those codes. When we didn't do it, too specific to your question, in 2004 or 5 when we did this, we did not align it in the context of sustainability at that time. But I think if you were to go out again to PMI.org, you'll see that they caught up to it, and there's much more sustainability focus in the context of the ethics program and all else that they do today. But in that initial wave, it was not a consideration, but it should have been. But that's the kind of living aspect of an ethics code, is it evolves as the organization and the world around it evolves.
I'd like to jump in real quick from a philosophical point of view. But there was this Nordic person who said, "You're telling me how to think," but ethics really is only an act. Ethics has very little to do with thinking. You can think anything you want. In the end, it's the act that counts anyway. So I found that a rather interesting beginner's comment from the Nordic person about ethics, actually.
Yeah, it's funny. We had a quick follow up with him. I know Mel is actually a friend of mine to this day, but I think when he said think, he meant around what's right and what's wrong. So the code implicitly says this is, without the words, this is right behavior, this is wrong behavior. So it's forcing that individual to think that way. But you're right. So that's why I say it's really about behavior, how we live, it's how we work. It is action.
Yeah,
it is action.
And can you talk about strategies that you did, or that you, if you were to do it again, might employ to get like buy-in and to make sure that you're incorporating, feedback from employees, from members?
Well, that's the most complex part of any organization, stakeholder relationship and engagement. So it's true, any activity you're trying to roll out in an organization, you want to engage all the appropriate stakeholders and recognize that there's other stakeholders who may not be impacted, but they may be interested. So that's another level of complexity. And again, it's stakeholder management is one of the knowledge areas of our standards, which are ISO accredited. So it's kind of second nature to us. So in building and taking the ethics program, we had immense amount of stakeholder engagement early on around the need for an ethics code, how mature they felt the organization was, how they worked in their organization, how it was considered. So your employer, everybody that's a member of PMI works in an organizational context. They're either an employee or a contractor. They could be a decision maker. They could be a regulator from state level or federal government. But they all have a context to them. So we wanted to understand their context from an ethical standard. And then we wanted to look at it global. So there was a big stakeholder engagement part up front, constant communication and feedback loops built in along the way. And we also had global ethics experts come in as part of the team to advise us to what's appropriate and not appropriate culturally, legally, and so on. And that was basically a major program for us. Again, the development, actually typing out the words probably took 6 weeks to get agreement on it, but it's that upfront stakeholder engagement and then the communication after we have something to share, which took elapsed time, 15 months. That's how we approached it.
And Michelle, I'm curious, what does it look like to you when a company or organization is truly acting in accordance with their values? We're talking about, you know, the implementation side. Yeah,
Sure.
you
So
start that, and everyone else feel free to jump in too.
yeah, so I'm gonna take this in a slightly different path, so I can speak for my ICP, but our organization, we have a lot of organizations that join. So major companies that you've heard of might join as an organizational member to enable their entire staff to access ISSP, to access the society and the resources. The thing that we always have to watch when as citizens, as consumers, as potential employees of organizations is an organization actually doing what they're saying they're doing? Between the lines, greenwashing. I mean, this is something, the word hasn't come out yet today, but that is ultimately what we're talking about a lot as well. And when we look at greenwashing, there's a lot of ways we can look at combating it. There's a lot of major ways. Obviously going to be education of the consumer and education of stakeholders, making sure they understand, you know, where the rubber hits the road. Is this actually happening? ESG was also already brought up. ESG reporting is a major thing right now in the field as a whole. Everybody's involved in some way in ESG reporting, but the brilliance of the attention that's happening, separate from kind of how to do it, what's the right standards, all the things. What's really important is people are paying attention to data for the first time through the sustainability lens at a much bigger scale than ever before. So your CFO, your CEO is now on the line for the data that's going into a report, specifically about sustainability, their environmental impact, your social impact, which again, those United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, it goes beyond just the environment. We have to think about things like slavery, which is very pervasive still today. We have to think about everything from the infrastructure. We have to think about education and making sure girls have this equal access. All of those things are sustainability at their core, and they come into that ESG, how governance is getting involved, how governments are getting involved from a regulation perspective. So back to the question of how you can really tell. Again, we're a data-based society and industry. You're scientists sitting here looking at me. We have to look at the data. There has to be reports and there has to be regulations around what can go into the reports and how that happens, and it's happening very quickly. It's already been started in Europe. It's coming from the SEC here in the States. Everyone else, even if they're not required to meet the SEC regulations that are going to be coming in the next year, hopefully, they're now part of the supply chains for these major organizations that do have to report. So I don't care if you don't have to actually file with the SEC. I guarantee if you are anywhere down the supply chain, that ultimately that major corporation is going to be coming after you to make sure your data is valid. So that's where we can get beyond just consumer pressure, and we can start looking at also regulatory pressure, and that's where we start making real progress. So hopefully we can start getting away from the greenwashing claims that have really no backing. But it's a journey. It's going to be, especially when you look globally, there's a lot of variation in regulation. There's a lot of variation in how this is being handled. There are a lot of ways that we're all as a society trying to tackle it, but it's going to take time.
And you talked about the consumer pressure, the regulatory pressure. Can we talk about internal pressure?
Sure.
And you already hinted that this might differ globally, but maybe from a US perspective for students now, like how can people speak up and address ethical issues or sustainability violations in their workplace if they notice them, feel them?
Sure. And I guess we can translate this to students. How do you, as a student, push back on faculty, push back on campus facilities, etc.? There's a lot comes from that groundswell of support of pressure from the bottom up. A lot of decisions we always think of, you know, the C-suite sitting in, or deans or whoever sitting at the top, making these high level decisions and pushing them down. Increasingly, they're listening to that bottom up approach also. What we're finding is it's actually the hardest at the manager level to get buy-in there. We can get the buy-in at the bottom level, usually at these major organizations. They understand. A lot of times it's emerging professionals, it's you all, it's younger generation that truly believes in this and sees the importance. And then the C-suite sees it from the regulatory perspective, possibly from the pressure from competition, the market, etc. Where it really gets complicated is building it into that managerial level. And that is because they're already struggling to just meet the pressures of the top and the bottom. So it's just, if it's not baked into someone's job description at that middle level, especially, we're going to struggle with ultimately making a lot of progress. But how can you speak up? We are seeing a really big shift in the C-suites, especially being more accessible, open to comment from the bottom up. There are green committees that are forming at these major organizations. There are ways you can join professional societies and learn how other organizations are handling things and bring that back. There's ability to bring education and professional development. Again, it's just going to come back to culture, though. The culture of your organization here in the States even is really, really critical, and how much you want to look for a company that has ability for you to really participate at the big picture level as well.
I'd even add that it's essential that you do that at the grassroots level, because you mentioned top down, where we've seen success in implementing anything in organizations, there's both. There may be top down, maybe more enlightened people that recognize there's a need to change, whatever it is, in this case, focus on sustainability. But even if that's not there, we've seen other organizations where there's a grassroots swelling of interest and passion around it, which almost forces the mindset of those that are making decisions to open up maybe more rapidly. I'll give you a great example. IBM was in transition just decades ago, but they were going from a product company to a solutions company, new CEO, and the project management community within IBM basically wrote a manifesto and sent it to the CEO, with the new CEO, and it was influential enough that the new CEO said, okay, we're going to be excellent in project management for developing solutions for our clients versus products. Back in the day, they blew mainframes within that era of transition, and they were successful. And I say, when I left PMI, IBM was among, if not the most mature, among the most mature in the discipline of project management organization. And we've seen that play out against other initiatives. And I agree with the separation comment that we have to find a way where we stop separating and everything's not an add-on. It's this plus this plus this. They're all so closely related. I think that's where young professionals coming out of school, even while you're in school, but coming into an organization, you will find an opportunity. And one way to do that is leverage other organizations that can bring you the data, perhaps, bring you relationships, which will be critical to open those doors. So if you're joining, various clubs, various other associations, you can use that information to help build the support as a community within an organization. And if they don't ever get late, then leave. Just get a different, if that's not for you, if that's your passion. So.
And if I can jump in really quick
You go first.
did not see the mic. Yeah. No, if I can jump in really quick just to build on what's being said. So, I mentioned at the beginning that we harness hackathons as climate action, right? And so that's driving environmental innovation. I'd really like to challenge you all to think critically about what innovation and environmental innovation in the 21st century is, right? Because these folks have laid out a very clear need, right? The need to stop seeing all of these different process pieces as so separate. The need to stop seeing environmental responsibility and ethical responsibility as add-ons. And so I'd really like to encourage you to think about, is innovation really just electronic consumer products in the 21st century? Or are you so much more talented and capable than that? And can you be thinking about project management as innovation process management as innovation, thinking about how to bring different stakeholders together as innovation, because you're training right now in how to interface with the universe, right? That's what engineering is understanding science and being able to harness it in service of whatever it is that you're doing. So I'd really like to just challenge you as people who are coming into the engineering space to think about how you can generalize the critical thinking skills that you're developing and the implementation skills that you're developing. And yes, build strong bridges with sustainable materials, do it. Yes, build more efficient batteries for electric vehicles, do it. But also think carefully about how you can use that knowledge to create the processes that enables us to scale up in a sustainable way and not fall victim to kind of carbon tunnel vision, where we reduce carbon emissions while also making human rights worse, or falling victim to kind of techno-solutionism, thinking that technical solutions are the only solution, that are easy to implement, as opposed to kind of the vastness of the world. So just putting that out there is kind of a call to action based on like really the excellent points that you guys brought up.
Yeah, I really like that. And Rick, I know you have something to say, but I have a.
Okay. I got an additional half hour, we'll bring the point up again.
Hoping that you could expand on that. From an engineering perspective, engineers are always working to balance, design targets with constraints. And I'm wondering if you could talk about like how ethics shows up in design criteria, how we decide what defines success of a project,
Right.
who gets to set those criteria, who gets to determine what the constraints are.
Well,
Yeah.
in my life, it's a fascinating thing, and most of the work I do. Sorry. In my life, it's fascinating. Most of the work I do is related to ship design, and in ship design, because there's so many variables, work along what's called a design spiral. I'm not sure if any of you who's heard of this design spiral. Real quick, hands. Okay, so basically what it is, you take a walk and say, well, this is the size I want, that I need this power, that I need this much fuel, then oops, now I have too much fuel in my boat, so I need a bigger boat, so now I need a bigger boat, I need a bigger engine. These are called design spirals, and in design spirals never took into account sustainability, but today, in my community especially, there's a real big push that says you have to put sustainability in a design spiral, otherwise you don't get it to work. So the engineering the actual practical engineering is changing very rapidly, and it's actually increasing in complexity. We're working to a much higher level of complexity than we used to, which requires deeper thought and deeper skills. And I just want to throw a bone real quick to this particular conference where I actually had a realization just yesterday, where I realized that the classic engineering economics classes that have been taught, they have always looked at cost, but they've never taken this sustainability into account. And I think it's high time that the educational community changes that when they teach that they also include the cost of sustainability in engineering analysis.
Thanks. And I want to make sure we have time for student questions, but I'm wondering if each of you can take a minute to say, and you started this, but how can students start thinking about implementing these ideas right now?
You want me to start?
Yeah, sure.
You look ready.
Never underestimate the stupidity of the executive suite. I am in the executive suite, and as a consultant, I spent a lot of time in much bigger executive suites, and never underestimate the ignorance of the executive suite. I'll give you one example. I was sitting with a minister of environmental, Minister of the Environment of Horses, and we're talking about sustainable energy. And I said, well, nuclear has to be an option. He goes, no, nuclear can't be, because it has to be the backup power. And you can't throttle a nuclear power plant. In other words, you can't drive very output of a nuclear power plant. They go, who told you that? And he goes, the nuclear engineers that are nuclear power plants in England. I said, well, you miscommunicated or the line or the line. There's one of a number of things. You've ever heard of a nuclear submarine? You speed it up, you slow it down, you don't always run at the same speed. He goes, but here the policy is changing completely because you have the wrong piece of information. So that's my point. If you hear if you get sense that somebody's saying the wrong thing, make sure that you bring the correct information first.
Going down the table, I'll say, one thing that you can do right now to kind of get started implementing stuff in a word is organize. And both means, talk to your fellow students, understand if some work is already happening on your campus, get involved. It also means organize and put together a plan. If you're wandering around with an idea for a heat risk project on campus, figure out who in the Office of Sustainability you have to talk to make that a reality. If you're thinking about, when I graduate, I'm going to go here and I'm going to talk to this person, just start doing it now. Start emailing them now. So I think just for me, I always just think about organizing and organizing movements and seeing how much more powerful 5 people who are really passionate about an idea are than one person who's really passionate about an idea is. So
building on that, use your voice, connect, talk to people, build your network, not just on your campus. This is a really, really big thing. I talk to students all the time from all over the world. You all do an incredible job of knowing your professors, knowing other students on campus. Please, 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 you will do yourself a huge favor by building your network outside of your campuses today, because that is ultimately where you will get your first job a high percentage of the time. I talk to people again from all over the world. This is not just US based. Almost everyone has gotten at least half, if not more, of their jobs in their life through their network, not through a post on Indeed. Please build your network. I would be happy to help you build it through ISSP if that's the right fit for you, if that's the direction. There are other organizations dependent on where you're going. ESW is a great start to be able to connect across campuses, across multiple campuses, etc. Build your professional network from today, and then get those people involved on your campus, because they also will have a lot of sway power with your dean, with your professors, etc. In order for them to understand what industry is looking for, we need to do a better job, and it's something that I'm working with the Engineering for One Planet my friends over there, obviously ESW as well, to understand how we can get industry more connected on campuses. But from today, your biggest thing you can do is use your voice and build your network. Yes, on campus. Yes, absolutely. Also out in the real world as well, beyond your campus boundaries, because that will set you up to excel much, much faster.
And my answer is build your network.
Ditto.
But what I would do, so you guys did a great job on that. So what I would add is, I would say expand your interest and or skill set. It'll be helpful if you go into an organization. What I mean by that is you're being educated in engineering. You might have a minor, sure, maybe it's also another engineering area. But if you could expand, say, to an area of understanding organizational strategy, it gives you a language and a dialect to talk and speak within your organization. Quick example, there's a framework, a lot of strategic frameworks, but usually starts at an aspirational level. We want to be something, right? But if you understand, and this speaks to the add-on, most people say, we have sustainability as part of our strategy now. And they really don't. But if you can expand your skill set to understand how strategy and really the delivery of you at the organization level is organized, understand that language when you're speaking in that organization, you'll be able to say, well, wouldn't it be interesting if ethics through values and principles, and those values and principles incorporated sustainability, and it was all the way up front here in our strategy as we are articulated and to the entire organization for customers, versus here's our strategy, and along the way we've added in ability, we've added equality, we've added whatever, the list goes on. And what I found is organizations don't understand strategy, but if you could understand it and communicate, which we need to push us up in the kind of hierarchy of decision making. And I think ethics does that, which is informs, we need to incorporate that at every decision making point in the organization. So if you can expand your portfolio a little bit through a network, I think that would be very helpful, giving you a new language besides the engineering or technical language you have to help speak within your organization.
If I could just quickly add on to that, building your language, one thing to look at is credentials. If you haven't considered that, industry doesn't always know what Cornell University has taught you at the end of the day. And not a lot of people tell you that when you're in school. We hear that all the time on the employer side. We don't know what your teachers are teaching you in your classrooms. We hope it's the correct thing. We kind of know the reputation of your school, but at the end of the day, sustainability programs, sustainable engineering programs are popping up all over the place. And as an industry, I might be in HR and have no idea what you're actually going to know, and I have to assume that you don't know what I need you to know. So credentials, industry recognized credentials like that Sustainability Excellence Associate, is really, really key, because I know as an industry professional, if you've got that SEA behind your name or that lead GA behind your name or whatever that is, that's industry recognized, what right off the bat, I know that's your baseline. You can speak this language, you understand systems thinking when it comes to sustainability as a whole, you know how this works. So that's the other thing to really, really consider is credentials as a way to supplement your degree and give you the language, because you'll learn through gaining those credentials. It gives you the industry language to match your degree, because unfortunately, degrees are not always enough to get you the actual position.
Does anyone have any questions? Yeah, go ahead.
So I come from the social sciences, and I was just wondering if you guys talk to anyone from that field when you're thinking about like intersectionality and community impact.
You want to repeat the question too?
Yeah, I can start. And so our friend said that they're from the social sciences and wondering if we engage with that field when we're thinking about impact and intersectionality. So the short answer is yes. You know, and I think that some of that, to be honest, is informed by my personal experience. I'm an electrical engineer, but I currently study environmental policy and planning because I had just this huge realization that as engineers, we're kind of fed that like, oh, we're going to be able to solve all these complex problems, and really we can't. We're an important part of it, but we need to be interfacing with those fields. So what we do at Earth Hacks in terms of that interface first is our environmental hackathons. We're very generous with the word hackathon. We welcome people from all backgrounds, and we actually really, really encourage people who are not in computer science, not in computer engineering, not in electrical engineering to come. And we love it when English majors work with chemical engineers and come up with an insanely creative project that kind of blows everyone's mind. So first is just inclusion and making the space for engineers specifically to understand that we have certain value, and you know what, other people really do too, and we really need to work together. And secondly, we kind of try, especially in our environmental justice and technology project, to make a lot of references to the work done by social science scholars, so that people have a context for what it is we're talking about. Why are we talking about, you know, engineering in the real world is complicated? Where does the context for that come from? And, you know, being able to point to people in that direction. So from our side, yes, but we think we're one small piece of the puzzle, and there really needs to be more in the engineering space as a whole for actual robust solutions to complex challenges.
And I would just add again, I know I brought it up several times, but the UN Sustainable Development Goals are agreed upon across all nations in the world, except for I think 2. And those I ran and I forget which other one.
All right.
But at the end of the day, whether or not we're meeting those goals, and that's a totally different conversation, the world sees the value of the social sciences and understands from that systems-based thinking, because engineering is all systems, how interconnected these are. And you cannot have equal access to education growth without also understanding economics, without also understanding developing countries and developed countries working together financially, you know, supporting one another. It all comes in. So yes, our organization has a lot of people coming from the social sciences, and we're very deliberate about ensuring we look at human rights, we look at that broader social aspect of this. It is part of ESG. So absolutely, social science is critical. And again, we have to break down sector barriers. We just can't do it anymore with all these different silos. It's just not successful. We need your engineering brains to be working with the policy brains. It's just not going to work until we start doing that. So yeah, I have really cool stickers too, just in case any of you are interested, but this is kind of our tenet: better together. We have to work together. Social has to come together with environment, with governance. So yeah.
And all I'll say is that since we're a scientific community mostly, there's actually a lot of science behind getting better results with the diversity that was just been described between these two. There's a whole set of scientific research that says you get better outcomes from a diverse group participating in teams, if you want to use a more broad term. So I found that to be the case personally.
What do you think are common misconceptions about working in sustainability ethics?
And to repeat the question, common misconceptions about working in sustainability and ethics.
That every day you're going to go into work and make the world a better place. and that everything's gonna be sunshine and rainbows. It's a hard field that you guys have chosen. I commend you and we need you. There's a lot of negative data out there. It's a scary challenge that we're up against. We're pushing against not only scary data and climate change and human rights issues, we're also pushing against decades and centuries of doing things in a certain way and steering a very big ship that's been going in the wrong direction for a really long time. This is a hard field, but we need you to take that challenge, understanding that it's going to take time. It's hard. You want to hit the ground running and make major progress day one. Working within the system, which is so critical within the organizations, within the government, within all of the things that have been pushing us in the wrong direction for too long, is not an easy path. It's a critical path for us as a world and as a future society. So that would be my input.
I need to point out that these two questions are set off because they're on the sticker is spelled off.
Oh yeah, I have those.
So that thing got to spell it off. Thank you for those two questions.
And then we had one more question back.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could talk about how you incentivize stakeholders to actually take the change. So like in an engineering application, like how do you convince the stakeholders to make a design change? Might be more expensive to align their templates necessarily.
I'd like to take that. It's very short. Fear. Scare the hell out of it. I mean, fear is really one of the main motivators, and whether it is related to the fact that if you don't do this, you're going to lose your job. If you're not going to do this, you're going to be really embarrassed and wish you were never born. Fear is an extremely good motivator.
The market, fear of the market, fear of the consumer,
Market,
fear of
whatever, right?
fear of regulation, fear of I agree.
So when you set your strategies, you kind of have to think in terms of those conditions to get stakeholders to come along.
So let's give these panelists another, sorry,